Welcome in that fourth video about the stadium tutorial within Golaem. In this video I will show you how to populate an actual shot based on the simulation scene we've been doing in the previous video. So this is my stadium layout here, and maybe a couple of things to let you know about the way I made this. So I've got all my modeling here. I put all the geometry which will be used as a ground for my character into a specific group which is called ground, and I made some geometry to place my character. So this is my seats, and every face here will be a position where I put my character. So here I put that as faces, so that's easier to actually see, but it could be vertices, it could be hedges, it could be whatever component you'd like, or it can be different objects if you want to. But I just wanted to have a placeholder for my simulation. So regarding the simulation, so if you remember, this is the simulation we've been doing in the third video, and this is this scene here that I will reference into my stadium. So the first thing I want to do is to select my ground here and create a terrain node. So now within my terrain node, it says that the geometry on which my characters will be adapted, the feet will be adapted, will be contained into that group ground. That's something I want to make sure I'll do before creating a reference within that scene, because as soon as I'm going to create a reference, if the referenced scene has a terrain, and this is the case here, meaning within my simulation scene, there's terrain here within the environment. So if it has a terrain, that will be detected when I'm going to create my scene, and if I don't have a terrain yet, it will be added as a default terrain. If you don't create your terrain first and you want to change that later because you may want to fix this, you can go into the crowd manager. So this is the node which handles everything which is global to the simulation, and within the terrain locator you will see that you will have the reference terrain here, and you will just be able to switch here, go back to the terrain you just created or another one. Really up to you here. So okay, I've created my terrain. Now I can go within Golaem and say create reference. So I can load my simulation scene. It's going to load everything within my scene here. And if I take a look at the origin of the scene, I'll get my particles, population tools, and so on. So I'm just going to hide this because I don't need them. It's not mandatory, but that's just easier for me to figure out what's wrong if later I have to debug what's going on. And it has also imported my shading holder file. So one thing which is important here is if I take a look at my shading holder files, any mesh, let's say that mesh here, I take a look at the name of the shader comes now with a namespace. And the thing is, within my character file, if I take a look at my character file I created earlier, if I take a look at the geometry part, here the name of the shader which will be assigned to that geo at render time is just this name here. So it doesn't have any namespace because when we loaded the shaders, well, the geometry didn't have any namespace. So I want to make sure that when I'm going to render that scene, the namespace is going to be taken into account. So to do this, for every entity type I have in my scene, I go within the render previous display attribute here, and I'm just going to specify what's going to be in the namespace of that character. So it's going to be scene. Okay. So my type has been imported within the simulation. The shaders have been imported as well, so I'm quite happy with that. Now I can populate my scene. So to populate, I can go within my seat group here, go into face mode, and select where I'd like to populate my characters. So I selected a couple of faces. I can go within the population tool, and I can use a different mode we haven't used yet, which is component mode population tool, which means that for every component selected, so once again it can be face, hedges, vertices, it can even be particles selected as component mode. If I press that button, that creates a slot, and obviously you can still change the orientation so they all face the same direction, which is the direction of the stadium, and I can actually hide that C geometry so I can better see now the slots for my population tool. Within my population tool, I can just unbind the noise, so I can noise a bit the Z direction, and I can press create, and now that's creating my simulation and that's loading my shaders. So let's take a look at what's going on here. So play the sim for a couple of frames. Maybe I'm going to remove the shadows and the ambient occlusion, so that'll be faster to run. And add a couple of frames as well. Okay, so I've got my sitting characters, I've got my standing characters. That looks actually pretty nice. Yeah, not bad. And they're just playing, the same behaviors we've been defining earlier, which means if I just select a character here, I can see he's playing the standing animation. I can see where he is, so I can debug the same way I've done that. I can even go within the behavior, change the attributes, but as this is a reference, one thing you can't do is to change the design of the graph. So you can change the triggers, you can change whatever you want to, but every arrow here, every operator there, if you want to change those, you need to go back within your first scene. And if you need to refresh the reference here, make sure that you rewind the sim and you don't have any active simulation, else that may be problematic. So what about starting my Mexican wave? So the thing is, the Mexican wave, the plane which triggers the Mexican wave is right now at the origin of the scene, so I may want to create another polygon to test this into that scene. So that polygon is here. Let's scale it a bit, something like this, and go back at frame 1 and keyframe that. So I'm gonna say, okay, it's gonna start from here. At frame 50, it will start here. At frame 150, it will go something like there. Now I want to connect that plane to my start trigger for my wave. So I can go within the plane here, select my 2D trigger and map it, and take a look. And now I should get my characters sitting, standing, and as soon as the plane goes by, they play the Mexican wave. So that's pretty sweet. And I'm quite happy with that. So let's say you would like to fill up the whole stadium with this. Well, you just have to make a bigger pop tool and emit your particles, animate your plane, and you'll be good. So that's pretty convenient. So obviously here, that's one way of doing this. So let's remove the anti-aliasing so that just go faster once again. Okay, so now we are almost near real time. So playing the Mexican wave. So obviously, if you want to have such a behaviors, with triggering and reacting to some events of the scene, well, you need to go through the simulation steps. So you need to go through the behavior graph and so on and so forth. So let's say you want to have a whole stadium making the Mexican wave. You'll have to populate the whole stadium and simulate the whole stadium. So that's actually one way of doing it, and it's a totally correct way. There's one other way I would like to show you. So let's say we don't need to have that Mexican wave because that's not so often that we'd like the characters to react. So we're going to save this as a new iteration of the scene. So it's going to be a stadium layout shot 1. And within that shot 1, we actually don't have the Mexican wave. So if I don't have the Mexican wave, I can just remove that behavior. It will be fine. And my director just tells that I will have more characters sitting than characters standing. So I can say, okay, 3 times more characters sitting than characters standing, and launching my scene again. And okay, it's quite happy with the director is quite happy with that simulation, but it would like the whole stadium to be filled with those characters. So instead of redoing a sim, putting every character on the set, there's actually another way I would like to show you. So that will be the topic on the next video.